The sun hung low over the dusty edge of Marrow Creek, casting long shadows across the trading post's weathered planks. Gideon Hale stood in the shade of the overhang, his hat pulled low, watching the crowd gather near the wagon yard. He'd come for supplies, nails, lamp oil, maybe a decent saddle blanket. But the murmur of voices pulled his attention sideways. Something felt wrong. The air tasted like heat and shame. A small crowd had formed near the hitching post. Men in dusty vests and worn boots. A few women clutching shawls, their faces tight with something between pity and disgust. And at the center of it all, a girl. She sat on the ground, knees pulled to her chest, wrists bound with frayed rope. Her dress was pale blue once, maybe. Now it clung to her in patches of dust and sweat. Her dark hair fell across her face, hiding her eyes. But Gideon saw her shoulders. They trembled. Not from cold, from something deeper. "Don't look there," she whispered. Her voice was so soft, Gideon almost missed it. But the words hit him like a fist to the gut. She wasn't begging for help. She was begging for mercy. Gideon's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, his boots scraping the dirt. The crowd parted slightly, just enough for him to see the man standing over her. Tall, clean coat, silver watch chain gleaming at his vest. He smiled like a man who'd never missed a meal. "Gentlemen," the man called out, his voice smooth as whiskey. "Let's not waste daylight. This one here, 17, no husband, no kin to speak of. Been sold 3 times already, but don't let that worry you. She's healthy, strong back, quiet most days." Gideon's stomach turned. The girl didn't look up. The man nudged her shoulder with the toe of his boot. "Stand up, girl. Let 'em see you proper." She didn't move. The man sighed, then crouched down beside her. His voice dropped, quieter now, but Gideon heard every word. "You want me to drag you up, make a scene, or you gonna show some sense?" The girl's fingers curled into the dirt. Slowly, she rose. Her legs shook. Her bound wrists hung in front of her like a chain she couldn't break. The crowd murmured. Gideon felt his chest tighten. This wasn't a sale. It was an execution. The man with the watch smiled. "There we go. Now, gentlemen, what's your opening bid?" Silence. A few men shifted their weight. One spat into the dust. Another turned away, shaking his head. Gideon stepped forward. The man's eyes flicked to him. "You interested, stranger?" Gideon didn't answer right away. He looked at the girl. Her face was still hidden beneath her hair, but he saw the tremor in her hands, the way her breath came shallow and quick. "How much?" Gideon asked. The man grinned. $40, cash." Gideon reached into his coat and pulled out a folded stack of bills. He counted out 40, then handed it over without a word. The man took the money, counted it twice, then nodded. "She's yours!" Gideon stepped toward the girl. She flinched. "Easy," he said quietly. "I'm not gonna hurt you." She didn't look at him. He pulled a knife from his belt and she gasped, jerking back. But Gideon crouched low, blade in hand, and cut the ropes at her wrists. The frayed ends fell to the dirt. The girl stared at her hands like she didn't recognize them. Gideon stood, slipping the knife back into his belt. "You got a name?" She didn't answer. "Where's your family?" Still nothing. Gideon exhaled slowly. "All right. Come on, let's get you out of here." He turned toward his horse, but the girl didn't follow. She stood frozen, her arms wrapped around herself, staring at the ground. Gideon looked back. "You can walk, or you can stay." But if you stay, someone else is gonna buy you before sundown." The girl's head lifted just slightly, her eyes, dark, hollow, filled with something Gideon couldn't name. Met his for the first time. She took one step, then another. Gideon nodded and started walking. The girl followed a few paces behind, her bare feet silent in the dust. The crowd watched them go. No one said a word. They rode in silence. Gideon kept his gelding at a slow walk, glancing back every few minutes to make sure the girl was still there. She sat behind him, hands clutching the back of the saddle, her face turned away from the town. The sun dipped lower, painting the valley in shades of amber and rust. Gideon's ranch sat on the edge of a shallow creek, sheltered by a line of cottonwoods. The house was small, 2 rooms, a stone chimney, a porch that sagged on one side. But it was quiet, safe. He dismounted and tied the horse to the rail. The girl slid down without a word, her legs buckling slightly when her feet hit the ground. Gideon reached out to steady her, but she jerked away. "All right," he said quietly. "You can sleep in the house. I'll take the barn." The girl's eyes narrowed. Why? It was the first word she'd spoken since the trading post. Gideon met her gaze. "Because I didn't buy you to own you." She stared at him, searching his face for the lie. Gideon opened the door and stepped inside. The girl hesitated, then followed. The house was sparse, a table, 2 chairs, a cot in the corner with a threadbare blanket, a single window overlooking the creek. Gideon gestured to the cot. "That's yours. There's water in the pitcher. I'll bring you something to eat in a bit." The girl didn't move. Gideon turned to leave, then paused. "What's your name?" She looked at him for a long moment, then quietly, "Ellie." Gideon nodded. "All right, Ellie. You're safe here." He stepped outside and closed the door behind him. But as he stood on the porch, staring out at the fading light, something gnawed at him. Her face, the way she'd looked at him. There was something familiar about her, something he couldn't quite place. But it sat heavy in his chest, like a stone he'd been carrying for years. Gideon woke before dawn. The barn smelled of hay and old leather, and his back ached from sleeping on the floor. He splashed water on his face from the trough outside, then walked toward the house. The door was still closed. He knocked softly. "Ellie, you awake?" No answer. He pushed the door open. The cot was empty. The blanket lay folded at the foot of the bed. Panic flared in his chest. Then he saw her. She stood by the window, her back to him, staring out at the creek. Her hair was loose now, falling past her shoulders. She'd washed her face. Her dress was still torn, but she'd pulled it tighter around herself. "Ellie," Gideon said quietly. She didn't turn. "Why'd you buy me?" Gideon hesitated. "Because no one else should." "That's not an answer." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You're right, it's not." Ellie finally turned. Her eyes were red but dry. "Everyone says that." "I'm helping you. You're safe now." Then the door closes and... "That's not what this is," Gideon said firmly. "Then what is it?" Gideon exhaled slowly. "I don't know yet." Ellie's jaw tightened. "You paid $40 for me. You think that makes it better?" "No," Gideon said. "It doesn't." Silence stretched between them. Ellie crossed her arms. "So what now? You keep me here, put me to work, wait till you get bored." Gideon shook his head. "You can leave whenever you want. I won't stop you." "Where would I go?" I don't know, but it's your choice. Ellie stared at him, searching his face again. Then she looked away. My papa sold me. Gideon's chest tightened. Yesterday morning, Ellie continued, her voice flat. He took me to that trading post, said he couldn't afford to keep me, said I'd be better off with someone who could. Gideon said nothing. He didn't even look at me when he left, Ellie whispered, just took the money and walked away. Gideon's hands curled into fists. Where's your ma? Dead. 3 years now. Any brothers? Sisters? Ellie shook her head. Just me and Papa, till yesterday. Gideon's mind raced. He wanted to say something, anything that would ease the weight in her voice. But words felt useless. Then something clicked. A memory. Years ago. 8, maybe 9. A family living just outside Marrow Creek. A man named Jacob Tate, a wife, a little girl with dark hair. Gideon had worked for Jacob once, mending fences after a hard winter. The man had been kind, quiet, loved his daughter. Gideon looked at Ellie. What's your last name? She frowned. Tate. Why? Gideon's stomach dropped. Your pa, Jacob Tate. Ellie's eyes widened. You know him. Gideon ran a hand through his hair. I worked for him. Long time ago. You were just a kid. Ellie's expression hardened. Then you know what kind of man he is. Gideon shook his head. No, that's not. He sold me, Ellie said coldly. What more do you need to know? Gideon opened his mouth, then closed it. She was right, but something didn't add up. Jacob Tate had been a good man, a hard worker, devoted to his family. What could have broken him that badly? Gideon looked at Ellie. When did things change with your pa? Ellie's jaw tightened. After Ma died, he started drinking, lost the farm. We moved to a shack near the river. Then the money ran out. And he sold you. Yeah. Gideon felt the weight of it settle over him. He wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, that her father was broken, not her. But before he could speak, the sound of hoofbeats echoed from the road. Gideon moved to the window. 3 riders, coming fast. Ellie stepped beside him, her face pale. Who are they? Gideon's jaw tightened. I don't know, but they're coming here. The riders pulled up outside the fence. One of them dismounted, a tall man in a long coat, a badge glinting on his chest. Sheriff Dalton. Gideon's blood ran cold. Dalton had a reputation. He called himself a lawman, but everyone knew the truth. He worked for whoever paid him, and right now, that meant protecting men like the one at the trading post. Dalton knocked on the door. Gideon opened it. Morning, Hale, Dalton said, his voice smooth. Mind if I come in? I do. Dalton smiled. Suit yourself. I'll make this quick. You bought a girl yesterday. Name's Ellie Tate. Gideon didn't respond. Her father's looking for her. Dalton continued. It says she ran off, wants her back. Ellie stepped into view, her voice sharp. He sold me. He doesn't get to want me back. Dalton's eyes flicked to her, then back to Gideon. That's between her and her pa. Law says he's got rights. Law says a man can't sell his daughter. Gideon shot back. Dalton's smile faded. You questioning me, Hale? Gideon stepped forward. I'm saying she's not going anywhere. Dalton's hand drifted toward his gun. That's not your call. Gideon's voice dropped. Then make it yours. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Dalton stepped back. You're making a mistake, Hale. Maybe. Dalton mounted his horse. We'll be back with Jacob Tate, and you better have her ready. The riders turned and rode off. dust rising in their wake. Gideon closed the door. Ellie stood frozen, her face white. "What are we gonna do?" Gideon looked at her. "We're not giving you back. He's the law. He's a coward in a badge." Ellie's hands trembled. "You can't fight him. You'll lose everything." Gideon met her eyes. "Some things are worth losing." The next morning came too fast. Gideon stood on the porch, rifle in hand, watching the road. The air was still, heavy with the promise of heat. The creek whispered behind the house, but everything else felt held breath. Ellie sat inside, her knees pulled to her chest, staring at the floor. Gideon had told her to stay out of sight. If Dalton came back, he didn't want her anywhere near the door. The sun climbed higher. Then just before noon, the dust rose again. 4 riders this time. Dalton in front. Behind him, 3 men Gideon didn't recognize. Hired guns, most likely. Men who'd do whatever they were paid to do. And behind them, on foot, Jacob Tate. Gideon's chest tightened. Tate looked older than Gideon remembered. His shoulders hunched, his face hollow, but his eyes were hard. The riders stopped at the fence. Dalton dismounted. "Hale, last chance. Hand her over." Gideon didn't move. "No." Tate stepped forward. "She's my daughter. I got rights." Gideon's voice was cold. "You sold those rights for $40. Tate's face flushed. "You don't know what it's like, losing everything, watching your family starve. So you sold her." "I had no choice." "There's always a choice," Gideon said quietly. Tate's hands shook. "Bring her out. Please, I'll make it right." Gideon shook his head. "You had your chance to make it right. You chose money." Dalton stepped between them. "Enough. Hale, you're harboring property that don't belong to you. That's theft." "She's not property." Dalton's hand drifted to his gun. "You want to test that?" Gideon raised his rifle. "You want to test this?" The hired guns shifted in their saddles. For a moment, the world balanced on the edge of a blade. Then a voice cut through the silence. "Stop!" Ellie stepped onto the porch. Gideon's heart lurched. "Ellie, get inside." "No," she said firmly. She looked at her father. "You sold me, Papa. You took money and walked away." Tate's face crumpled. "I'm sorry. I was desperate." "You were a coward," Ellie said, her voice steady. "And I'm not going back." Tate's eyes filled with tears. "Ellie, please." "No." Dalton stepped forward. "Doesn't matter what she wants. Law's the law." Ellie looked at Dalton. "Then the law's broken." Dalton's smile was cold. "Maybe, but it's still the law." He reached for her. Gideon moved faster. The rifle swung up, barrel aimed square at Dalton's chest. "Touch her, and you're dead." Dalton froze. The hired guns drew their guns. Gideon didn't flinch. "You shoot me, you die next. All of you. And for what? $40. Dalton's jaw tightened. "You're outnumbered, Hale." "Maybe, but I'll take you with me." Silence. Then from the road, a new sound. Hoofbeats, more riders. Gideon's heart sank. But when the riders crested the hill, they weren't Dalton's men. They were ranch hands. Men Gideon had worked beside for years. Men from neighboring farms. Old, weathered faces, calloused hands, rifles slung over their shoulders. One of them, a gray-haired man named Dutch, pulled up beside Dalton. "Morning, Sheriff." Dalton's face paled. "This doesn't concern you, Dutch." Dutch looked at Gideon. "Gids Gelding came home alone yesterday. Figured something was wrong. Looks like we figured right. Another rider, A woman named Clara spoke up. "Dalton, I branded calves with you 20 years ago. Don't make me shoot a man I once called friend." Dalton looked around. The hired guns had lowered their weapons. Tate had stepped back. The tide had turned. Dalton's voice was low. "This isn't over." Dutch smiled. "Yeah, it is." Dalton mounted his horse. The hired guns followed. Tate stood alone for a moment, staring at Ellie. Then he turned and walked away. The riders watched them go. Gideon lowered his rifle. Ellie stood on the porch, her face unreadable. The sun dipped low, painting the valley in gold. The ranch hands stayed for a while, checking the property, making sure Dalton and his men were really gone. Dutch clapped Gideon on the shoulder. Clara brought a basket of bread and eggs. "You need anything, you send word," Dutch said. Gideon nodded. "Appreciated." One by one, they rode off. Ellie stood by the creek, her arms wrapped around herself, staring at the water. Gideon walked over slowly. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside her. "You didn't have to do that," Ellie said quietly. "I know. You could have lost everything." "Maybe." Ellie looked at him. "Why?" Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Because I knew your family, years ago, before everything fell apart." Ellie frowned. "What do you mean?" Gideon exhaled slowly. "Your ma, she died in a fire, right?" Ellie nodded. "I was there that night," Gideon said. "I saw the smoke, rode out to help. But by the time I got there, it was too late. Your pa was holding you outside. You were just a kid, maybe 8 years old. You had a burn on your arm. I wrapped it." Ellie's eyes widened. She pulled up her sleeve. A faint scar ran along her forearm. "That's from you?" she whispered. Gideon nodded. "I stayed till morning, made sure you and your pa were all right. Then I left. Figured you'd be okay." Ellie's voice cracked. "But we weren't. No, you weren't." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Ah, and you remembered?" "Yeah." Ellie covered her face with her hands. "I don't even remember that night. Just the smoke, and Ma screaming, and then nothing." Gideon's chest ached. "I should have checked on you, after, but I didn't, and your pa, he fell apart." Ellie lowered her hands. "It's not your fault." "Feels like it." Ellie shook her head. "You didn't sell me. He did." Gideon looked at her. "You gonna be all right?" Ellie was quiet. Then, "I don't know, but I think, maybe, someday." Gideon nodded. "That's enough." They stood in silence, watching the creek. Then Ellie spoke again. "Can I stay, for a while?" Gideon looked at her. "Long as you want." Ellie wiped her eyes. "Thank you." Gideon didn't respond, just stood beside her as the sun set. "So let me ask you, if you were Gideon, would you have opened that door? Would you have stepped into that crowd? Or would you have walked away? Take a deep breath. Pour yourself a cup of tea. And think about what it means to stand for something when the whole world's watching." If you're still with me, tap subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Tell me what time it is where you are, and tell me, do you believe people can change, or are we all just carrying the weight of what we've done? Days turned into weeks. Ellie stayed. She mended clothes, planted seeds in the small garden behind the house. She didn't talk much, but slowly, the hollow look in her eyes began to fade. Gideon taught her how to tend the horses, how to mend a fence, how to read the sky for rain. She learned quickly. One morning, a rider came up the road. Gideon tensed, but it wasn't Dalton. It was Dutch. "Morning, Gid," Dutch said, dismounting. "Got news." "What kind?" "Dalton's gone. Ran off 2 nights ago. Took what money he had and disappeared. Seems the folks in town got tired of his games. Held a meeting, voted him out." Gideon blinked. "Just like that?" Dutch grinned. "Just like that. New sheriff's a man named Carson. Good man, fair." Ellie stepped onto the porch. "What about my father?" Dutch's expression softened. "He's still around, living in that shack by the river. Heard he's been asking about you." Ellie's face was unreadable. "What's he want?" "Don't know, but if you want, I can ride out there. See what he's got to say." Ellie looked at Gideon. Gideon met her eyes. "Your choice." Ellie was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Tell him. Tell him I'm alive, and I'm okay, but I'm not ready to see him. Not yet." Dutch nodded. "I'll tell him." He rode off. Ellie stood on the porch, staring after him. Gideon stepped beside her. "You all right?" Ellie nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think I am." 2 months later, Gideon rode into town for supplies. When he returned, he found Ellie sitting on the porch, a letter in her hands. "What's that?" he asked. "From my father," she said quietly. Gideon waited. Ellie unfolded the letter. "He says he's sorry, says he knows he can't undo what he did. But he wants to try, if I'll let him." Gideon sat beside her. "What do you want to do?" Ellie folded the letter. "I don't know. Part of me wants to burn it. Part of me wants to see him. See if he's really changed. Or if he's just saying what he thinks I want to hear." Gideon nodded. "Both things can be true." Ellie looked at him. "What would you do?" Gideon thought for a long moment. "I'd give him a chance. Not because he deserves it, but because you do." Ellie's eyes filled with tears. "What if he hasn't changed? Then you'll know, and you can walk away, but at least you'll know." Ellie wiped her eyes. "All right, I'll see him, but not alone. I'll go with you." Ellie nodded. "Thank you." They rode out to the shack by the river. Jacob Tate was sitting on the porch, his head in his hands. When he saw Ellie, he stood, his face crumpled. "Ellie," he whispered. Ellie dismounted. Gideon stayed on his horse, watching. Tate stepped forward, then stopped. "I'm sorry. For everything. I was broken, and I took it out on you. And I'll regret that till the day I die." Ellie stared at him. "You sold me, Papa. You looked at me and saw $40. Tate's voice cracked. "I know, and I hate myself for it." "Good," Ellie said. "You should." Tate flinched. Ellie crossed her arms. "I'm not here to forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I wanted to see you. To see if you meant what you said in that letter." Tate nodded. "I meant every word." "Then prove it." "How?" "By leaving me alone, till I'm ready, if I'm ever ready." Tate's face fell, but he nodded. "All right, I'll wait." Ellie turned and mounted her horse. She looked at Gideon. "Let's go." They rode back to the ranch in silence. When they arrived, Ellie dismounted and stood by the creek. Gideon gave her space. After a while, she spoke. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive him." "You don't have to," Gideon said. "But I want to. Someday, maybe. That's enough." Ellie looked at him. "Thank you for everything." Gideon nodded. "You're welcome." Years later, people would still talk about the summer Gideon Hale stood against Sheriff Dalton. They'd talk about the girl who was sold and the man who bought her freedom. They'd talk about the ranch hands who rode out when it mattered. And they'd talk about how sometimes justice doesn't come from the law. It comes from people who decide they're not going to let cruelty run their county. Ellie stayed at the ranch. She built a life there, planted gardens, raised horses, found peace in the rhythm of the land. Jacob Tate stayed in his shack. He never came to the ranch, but once a year, Ellie would ride out to see him, just for an hour, just to check. And every time, he'd ask if she'd forgiven him. And every time, she'd say, "Not yet." But she kept going back, and that was enough. Gideon built 2 small wooden crosses near the fence line, marking the place where everything changed. He carved the names by hand, Ellie Tate on one, Jacob Tate on the other, not graves, reminders of the people they'd been, and the people they'd become. The sun dipped lower over the valley, dust rising around their feet as they worked the land together. Gideon knew the ghosts of that day would follow him. But when Ellie looked at him, her eyes clear, her hands steady, he saw something stronger than ghosts. He saw survival, and that was worth fighting for.